Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin. I tend to steer clear of video analysis because we are talking about a multi-million, if not billion-dollar industry, which has the sole function of deceiving the eye, designed to manipulate perception and transport the imagination away from reality, even if only for a little while. In my opinion, there is no conclusive video evidence of Bigfoot, which is more or less what I would expect from the creature described. But the Myakka Ape photos are worth some scrutiny. The two photos have one of two outcomes. Either this is a hoax, or it isn't. Some aspects of these photos lead me to believe that this is an outright hoax, and that it should be dismissed. But still, there are a few features that have intrigued me for a number of years, but I'll start at the beginning. They were anonymously mailed, accompanying a letter to the Sarasota Police Department, which is located 2/3 down the state of Florida, on the Gulf side. The letter was addressed to an animal control officer. I'll read the whole thing to give you the best understanding of the narrative behind the photos. Dear Sir or Madam, enclosed, please find some pictures I took in late September or early October of 2000. My husband says he thinks it's an orangutan. Is someone missing an orangutan? It is hard to judge from the photos how big this creature actually is. It is in a crouching position in the middle of standing up from where it was sitting. It froze as soon as the flash went off. I didn't even see it as I took the first picture because it was so dark. As soon as the flash went off for the second time, it stood up and started to move. I then heard the orangutan walk off into the brush. From where it was standing, I judge it as being about 6.5 to 7 feet tall in a kneeling position. As soon as I realized how close it was, I got back to the house. It had an awful smell that lasted well after it had left my yard. The orangutan was making deep whoomp noises. It sounded much farther away than it turned out to be. If I had known it was as close to the hedgerow as it was, I wouldn't have walked up as close as I did. I'm a senior citizen, and if this animal had come out of the hedgerow after me, there wasn't a thing I could have done about it. I was about 10 feet away from it when it stood up. I'm concerned because my grandchildren like to come down and explore in my backyard. An animal this big could hurt someone seriously. For 2 nights prior, it had been taking apples that my daughter brought from up north, off our back porch. These pictures were taken on the 3rd night it had raided my apples. It only came back one more night after that and took some apples that my husband had left out in order to get a better look at it. We left 4 apples. I cut 2 of them in half. The orangutan only took the whole apples. We didn't see it take them. We waited up, but eventually had to go back to bed. We got a dog back there now, and as far as we can tell, the orangutan hasn't been back. Please find out where this animal came from and who it belongs to. It shouldn't be loose like this. Someone will get hurt. I called a friend that used to work in animal control back up north, and he told us to call the police. I don't want any fuss or people with guns traipsing around behind our house. We live near I-175, and I'm afraid this orangutan could cause a serious accident if someone hit it. I once hit a deer that wasn't even a quarter of the size of this animal, and totaled my car. At the very least, this animal belongs in a place like Busch Garden, where it can be looked after properly. Why haven't people been told that an animal this size is on the loose? How are people to know how dangerous this could be? If I had known an animal like this was on the loose, I wouldn't have approached it. I heard on the news that monkeys that get loose can carry hepatitis, and are very dangerous. Please look after the situation. I don't want my backyard to become someone else's circus. God bless. I prefer to remain anonymous. I like how she references up north several times. Not all too descriptive if you're in Sarasota, Florida. She says she lives in Sarasota, east of I-175, which looks like this. Which does seem to contain a substantial human population beside a thick wilderness area, which will eventually become the Everglades if you go far enough south. Long story short, she was missing apples from a bushel that she left on her front porch. The location accompanied an unpleasant smell for 2 nights prior to the photos being taken, so she performed a stakeout. Clearly something alerted her to the presence of the creature. She went outside, armed with only her 1990s camera, to see what it was. She saw nothing until the flash of her camera illuminated this creature, that she says was only 10 feet away from her. She didn't know how close it was to her at the time. She said had she known how close it was, she wouldn't have gone outside at all. Here is her second flash. She said that it began to rise at the second flash, but it is still in a crouched position in the photos. She said it was between 6.5 and 7 feet tall. Again, crouched. Did you see the red flags? This letter and these photos are either a deliberate hoax or simply too bad to be a hoax. Would a hoaxer be so naive? I just can't imagine a situation where a person would see this in their backyard and go straight to hepatitis, which is transmitted through saliva-breaking skin, which is a bite. And if this thing had me in its mouth, I would be less concerned about a blood disease and more concerned about having my very own chapter in the next book by David Paulides. I mean, senior citizen or not, could anyone consider this to be an orangutan? So at the time, she was anywhere between 55 and 100 years old. I believe she knew how to use Microsoft Word in the year 2000, because the lines looked too straight to be any typewriter I've ever used. I don't know, you tell me. Can someone live 60 or more years on this planet, with television, movies, encyclopedias, and magazines, with at a minimum, rudimentary computer knowledge, really confuse an orangutan with this? Would a hoaxer, who actually wanted to pull off a hoax, write such a naive letter? Think about it. Would a hoaxer tell this story if he or she was trying to be convincing? She's a senior citizen who lives on the outskirts of a state park, who leaves apples on her back porch but gets upset when they're gone. She wanted to discover via photograph the culprit, without a flashlight, taking pictures into the dark. It is an orangutan, or at least her husband thinks so. She hit a deer less than a quarter this size, and it totaled her car. Is someone missing an orangutan? You know they can have hepatitis. Her grandkids play in the yard. They may not be safe from the orangutan. The orangutan that's 7 feet tall, at a crouch with shaggy black hair and fangs that walks onto her Florida porch at night. Had I taken a picture at night to reveal this, I certainly would have kept snapping photos if I didn't die on the spot. But one would think that your average person would drop the camera to retrieve a gun. Failing that, would drop the camera to retrieve a telephone in order to summon the nearest person with a gun, ideally a larger one, to shoot alleged nocturnal beastie. Because if this is a photograph of a flesh and blood animal, then we are looking at an animal that could tear a person apart without skipping a beat. But don't worry, an animal like this is not going to get hit by your car. This would be a little too clever for that. Loren Coleman managed to get his hands on the photos. He confirmed that they were taken in late October of 2000 and developed a couple weeks later, then mailed locally to the Sarasota Police Department. The photos were developed locally, so that lends a touch of credibility to the senior citizen possibility. These photos were at a minimum taken when the letter said they were, and developed presumably where a local would develop any photo. David Barksey, owner of a serpentarium and member of Sarasota's Animal Control Division, was very familiar with ape-like reports, both historical and recent, from the immediate area. He went as far as to say that police officers may laugh in public, but whisper in private. He regularly went on expeditions in Myakka State Park. He claims that a handful of times he was driven out of the woods by something making a lot of noise. He was told that what he was doing is illegal without a permit. His attempts to acquire a permit have been denied. But don't jump straight to Bigfoot conspiracy there. Such permits are often denied because if he gets lost or injured out there, he then becomes the state's problem. Barksey and Coleman sent high-resolution scans to film analyst David Bittner of Pixel Workshop. Bittner said that he is confident that the photo was not tampered with, as in it's not a composite overlay or special effect, and that the object photographed is not a cutout, meaning the object has dimension and depth. So the photos are of something, though Bittner had no comment on what that something may be. Bear with me here, because this is by no means my area of expertise, but seeing as the palmettos in both photos move very little, that leads me to believe that the photographer did not relocate between shots, but they do seem to be positioned differently enough to account for the photographer, or film subject, to move or shift his or her stance between the shots, which is not consistent with a tripod, because there is some movement, but is consistent with a senior citizen, who we would not expect to take a great leap backwards due to statistical physical condition. Again, not my area of expertise, but assuming the photographer moved only slightly between two shots in rapid succession, then it does seem that the subject moves. See that? But I'll come back to that in a minute. Cryptomundo dubbed the Myakka Ape photos a hoax. Here is Cryptomundo's side-by-side of the Myakka Ape photos with a display of Bigfoot from Ripley's Believe It or Not in the Wisconsin Dells. Cryptomundo claims that the Myakka Ape photos are either this or a display of the same style somewhere else. And they very well may be right. But that doesn't account for movement that the subject seems to have, nor does this display give me any indication of apparent eye shine and prominent dentition. But of course, the similarities are hard to ignore. And there is a Ripley's Believe It or Not in Orlando, Florida. I scrubbed through hundreds of TripAdvisor photos and general Google images. They had a lot of stuff on the skunk ape, but I couldn't find any of the same style. Doesn't mean there isn't one, but I couldn't find it. Cryptomundo may be right about this being a hoax, and they may be right about their display theory, but to me, these photos don't reflect a static or stationary object, in my opinion, because again, it does seem to move. The late, great, and much-missed Bobby Short of Bigfoot Encounters said that someone identifying themselves as Mitsuko Choden, a primate specialist from Japan, said that this is a popular ape costume from the Orient. And she may be right, but the reach of Google, particularly Google Shopping, is vast, so is eBay and Amazon, and I couldn't locate any suit that struck me as particularly akin to this photograph. I'm not saying there is no suit, but I couldn't find it. I was a little surprised and frankly pleased with how few commercially available ape suits actually seem to exist. And just about all of them are laughable, especially for the price. This seems to be the top-of-the-line, modern, commercially available ape suit. And for only $2,200, shipping and handling not included, additional processing fees may apply. And this is why I stay clear from video analysis. Even though this seems rather impressive compared to a costume that costs a couple $1,000s, there does exist a market to make people look like apes. We'll never definitively know what this is. So let's, for the first time ever, give a witness the benefit of the doubt. She was a senior citizen in the year 2000, somewhere in her 70s or 80s at the time, meaning she was likely born in the 1910s, 20s, or 30s, meaning she lived through one, if not more, world wars, the threat of nuclear annihilation, a childhood without antibiotics. She's tough as nails, and this monster merits a strongly worded letter as opposed to immediate action, and if it looks like an orangutan, then it is an orangutan. Consarn it. Am I giving her way too much credit? More than likely, but maybe not. All of us have or have had some colorful and tenacious older relatives, right? If we look past the red flags and momentarily accept that a woman took these photographs and saw what she saw and sent the letter looking for legitimate help, then the story takes a turn toward the unsettling. And this is why I have scrubbed through these photos for years now. This creature, costumed or not, does exactly what a great ape would do in this situation. Textbook. And I can show you. The photos don't appear to have much detail at all, but I still see some curiosities. Chimps have the most expressive faces of the non-human primates, so they are the best analog in this regard. It is generally accepted that they have 6 facial expressions. There is the pant hoot, which suggests the chimp is excited, often related to sex or food. Basically, no teeth are visible, and the lips flare out like a duckbill. The bulging lip face is anger, and not always the type of anger that you have before you punch someone, but often the kind of anger where you stew and plot and sulk. There is the covered upper lip face, which is expressly playful or happy. Academically, I've been warned not to use words like happy or sad in application to non-human primates, but that is stupid in my opinion, and ignorant. If the upper teeth are covered but not the lower, they are happy and playing. This is the pout, which is a request or even beg for comfort or attention. I imagine there aren't many pictures of this, because the action of being photographed is in fact giving it attention or stimulation in some way. It is characterized by a downward-facing and vulnerable position, with no teeth showing, with the mouth either slightly open or shut but not tightly. Then there is the full-toothed smile or full-toothed grin, which conveys abject fear or submission. All the good photos of this are copyrighted, but feel free to look them up yourself. See how the combatives on the side aggressively approach with bulging lip face, meaning calculated anger, while the creature in the middle is doing a classic full-toothed grin, a fear response indicating that he submits or taps out. The full-toothed grin is a fear response, but to humans, it may appear as aggressive, which is exactly what it wants you to think if it's scared. And then there is the scream. Despite the name, this facial expression is not always accompanied by sound. When this expression is made, the creature often leans forward if intent is offensive, or leans backwards if the intent is evasive. The scream often arises as a culmination of any of the previous facial expressions, like fear turned into a scream when an aggressor made contact with her. No doubt after her child, if you can see those little hands sticking out from the rear. From a strictly primatological behavioral abstract, I would certainly hypothesize that the ape would display the full-toothed grin for fear at the first flash. Then at the second flash, exhibit the scream expression in a backward-facing angle to indicate intent of retreat as opposed to offensive action. Fear, then scream to indicate retreat. Fear, then scream to indicate retreat. Fear, then scream to indicate retreat. It's really quite textbook. To anyone who has spent a lot of time with these creatures, as I myself have. Again, in the confines of the narrative, the creature was already nervous. He knew people were to be avoided. He had probably seen their paths and their structures, but he had never actually seen one before. Now, there's a person right in front of him. He freezes and hunkers, relying on his amorphous silhouette and the dark coloration to avoid detection. Simple but effective, that's why deer do it. Then a flash of light. His agitation turns to terror as he realizes he's been registered. He didn't know humans could do that with the light. He's evaluating his options when a second flash culminates his fear into action, as is indicated by a scream, with a head tilted backwards, right before retreat. I've seen this before. The first photo, because of the angle of the flash on the subject, doesn't capture this, but the second one does. See the darkening around the eyes? Almost like a raccoon effect? Apes have that. Their protrusion of the brow ridge acts as a visor for the eyes. This is to the same effect as why football players darken their under eyes, to prevent light from bouncing off the cheeks and into the eyes, in addition to shading from direct sunlight. It also appears that the eye shine decreases significantly from the first photograph to the second. This could absolutely be the result of the camera's slight reposition, but it is also what one would expect from eyes acclimated to darkness and then rapidly constricting after the first flash. And do these teeth look obviously fake to you? Because they don't to me. In fact, it's just about more or less what you would expect from a primate. So the content of the letter is a bit much. I am not convinced that these photos are of a display. And it could be a costume, I guess. But the fact that the eye shine seems to significantly decrease between the two flashes indicates a dramatic constriction of an eye that is not used to bright lights. The visored eyes strike me as organic, but I suppose a mask would have that same effect. The subject gives a textbook fear response, followed by a back-facing scream and retreat, which I have seen numerous times in my own research. I don't like video analysis. I'm not saying these photos are of a real animal. We'll never know. But the fact remains that whether or not this creature is real, if this is in fact a proper archetype of Bigfoot in the South, then we are talking about a variety of hominid in North America. And as they say, the more the merrier. Make sure to like this video, subscribe if you'd like to keep updated, and as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.